Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to Office Hours with Michael Kitces. For today's Office Hours, I want to talk a little bit about the technology that we pay for as advisors, how we pay for it, and reflect a little on why it is that I think we will pay so much for some types of advisor technology and so little for others. Now, most advisory firms that do what we'll call wealth management, some combination of financial planning and investment management, have three core technology pieces that they use. Portfolio accounting software to track all their portfolios, financial planning software to build all the plans, and CRM software that you use just to keep track of all the clients and keep it all together. I want you to think for a moment, though, about how much this software costs for the typical advisor to use. CRM software in our industry, usually about $500 to $1,000 a year. Maybe something like $40 to $80 per month for each advisor that uses the software. Financial planning software is a little bit more expensive. Packages like Money Guide Pro, Right Capital are about $1,000 to $1,500 a year, with a few like eMoney Advisor that are actually even much more expensive at about $3,000 per year. Then we get to the portfolio reporting solutions, though, which are typically the most expensive of all. You'll often see costs like $40 to $70 per year per account. So if you have 80 clients and they each have an average of 3 accounts, you got about 240 client accounts for, his IRA, her IRA, joint account times all the different client combinations. And you probably end up paying about $10,000 to $15,000 a year with a client base like that. In fact, companies like Orion Advisor Services have a $15,000 a year minimum fee just to get you up to that number. I want to reflect on that for a moment, though. So as advisors, we'll pay $600 for CRM that we must have to run our businesses as they grow, $1,200 a year for financial planning software, but upwards of $12,000 a year for portfolio accounting software. Those are really big differences for things that are all kind of part of the stack. Now, you might attribute some of that just to the specialization of the software, which I think is fair. There are lots of CRM platforms out there in a competitive landscape. We have industry solutions like Redtail and Wealthbox and Juncture that are built for advisors and are a little more customized and relevant to our industry than generic alternatives like less annoying CRM or Solve 360 or Sugar CRM. While financial planning software and portfolio accounting are more complex to design and build because of all the depth of the calculations that have to be done correctly, and there really aren't any industry neutral alternatives. But still, with all due respect to some of my friends at the portfolio accounting and reporting software companies, I'm not really convinced that the difficulty of designing and programming portfolio accounting software is really 10 times more complex than financial planning software to justify that it's typically 10 times as much money for the software license. And the reality is that even if it really is actually that challenging and complex to build, if it becomes so expensive that it's just not worth it to the business, we won't pay for it. We just won't justify that price. So the fact that Orion can charge $15,000 a year while Money Guide Pro can't even charge $1,500 a year isn't just about the challenge to execute and implement the software. It says something about what we as advisors are willing to pay for in the first place. And I want to talk for a few minutes about why I think that is and why it matters. But first, let's actually step back for a moment and just think about how financials work at an advisory firm to begin with. So the classic advisor's profit and loss statement for their business looks something like this. At the top, there's gross revenue. Out of that, we subtract out what are called the direct expenses, which is the cost it takes to actually get the revenue in the door and service it. So classically, this is where you subtract the cost of the firm's client-facing advisors, business development people, because they're the ones that directly solicit and manage the revenue. Often a chief investment officer goes here as well, because he or she is the one directly responsible for managing the portfolios that produce the revenue, at least in the typical AUM model. So we take our gross revenue, we subtract our direct expenses, that gives us our gross profit margin before we pay the rest of the cost of doing the business itself. Out of that, we subtract the broad category of overhead expenses of running the business, which is everything from administrative staff to rent, E&O insurance, and also our technology costs to arrive at the bottom line profits, net profits. So in essence, there are really two different kinds of expenses that get subtracted out here. Direct expenses up at the top, that are for things that produce revenue, client-facing advisors, lead investment managers. And then there's the overhead expenses that support the operation of the business, like admin staff and office space and technology. And the reason why this distinction matters is that most businesses will pay a lot more in direct expenses than we will in overhead expenses, precisely because direct expenses tend to produce more revenue that pays for itself. Right? Firms hire more advisors because it lets them get and service more clients who pay more revenue, which means the money you invest there tends to pay for itself as a business. That's why so many businesses are always looking for more advisors who can bring in clients. While overhead expenses are simply, they're a cost. They're a necessary cost of doing business, but they're a cost. And costs tend to be managed to bring them down as small as possible. This is one of the reasons why client-facing advisors get paid substantially more than administrative staff in most advisory firms. It's also why in most industries, the top salespeople, who are direct expenses that produce revenue, get paid far more than anyone else in the company. Sometimes top salespeople get paid more than the executives because the executives are still overhead. Some more than others, perhaps. But here's why this all matters. Because while classically all technology is in that overhead expense category for the business, I don't think that's actually the way we think about it when we decide what to buy and what to pay for. We maybe don't think of it in the profit and loss version of direct expenses and overhead expenses, but if you're running the typical AUM model and you're charging clients an AUM fee, the reality is that portfolio accounting software isn't really just an overhead expense for you. It's more of a direct expense. I mean, can you imagine trying to charge affluent clients an AUM fee and not even being able to track and report on how you're doing with the money you're managing? Right? It's kind of a requirement in order to get the AUM in the first place. You have to be able to report on the assets and how they're doing. So when your firm charges an AUM fee and needs portfolio accounting software to validate the AUM fee, you'll pay a lot for the portfolio accounting software because you need it for the revenue. By contrast, even for firms that do very rigorous financial planning as part of their AUM fee, you're kind of going to have the AUM fee no matter what if you've got the money and you're managing it. So doing good financial planning is good. It's a good value for clients. But doing good financial planning at a lower cost is even better because you're getting the same revenue and you're doing the same work. If you could do it for lower cost, you make more money and profit as a firm. So in an AUM model that doesn't charge for financial planning, the planning work itself is basically an overhead cost of doing business. So it may be a cost that has to be there, but as with any overhead cost, it tends to be something we're more price sensitive about and something we manage more aggressively. So in other words, I think one of the driving differences as to why we'll pay 10 times the cost for portfolio accounting software than financial planning software is because when we run an AUM model, we think of portfolio accounting software as something that drives revenue, while financial planning software is just a cost to be managed. And so we pay accordingly. In fact, if you extend this line of thought further, it actually becomes a little clearer about why and how it is that even within existing advisor technology categories, some software providers charge way more than others in what should be like a comparable solution for a comparable price. So for instance, financial planning software is typically an overhead cost to be managed for the business when you're doing an AUM model. So as we just discussed, like Money Guide Pro costs about $100 a month. eMoney Advisor is over $300 a month. Now, they're both financial planning software packages. They're both very capable. I don't think anyone is going to make the case that eMoney Advisor has 3 times the analytical power to charge 3 times the price. But what eMoney Advisor does have that Money Guide Pro does not is its client portal. That personal financial management portal, something that advisory firms can give to their clients to really engage them. And it matters because when clients link all their accounts to that portal and engage with the portal, they tend to become stickier clients who are less likely to leave, and therefore the firm has higher retention rate and keeps more revenue. In fact, I know a number of advisory firms that specifically highlight the eMoney portal as part of their value proposition for which the client is paying their fee. And there's more than one firm out there I know that actually charges an ongoing monthly fee for financial planning, a big piece of which is, Mr. and Mrs. Client, you get access to our special financial management dashboard. They're basically reselling eMoney Advisor as like an upgraded mint.com for their clients. By contrast, Money Guide Pro is just a financial planning software solution. It does some good calculations. We generally get what we need from it. We do need something to do the math and the projections to produce a plan. But when our primary revenue source is the financial planning fee in the first place, we just don't pay as much. eMoney helps bring in revenue with its client-facing portal. MoneyGuide Pro ends up being just another financial planning calculator tool. Now, I don't mean to demean MoneyGuide Pro here and the quality of the financial planning software solution they provide, but the numbers kind of speak for themselves. eMoney Advisor charges triple what MoneyGuide Pro does and has basically gained market share every year for the past decade. So say again, they charge 3 times as much and are growing faster, and got bought by Fidelity 3 years ago for $250 million. Because that's what happens when software is positioned as a revenue driver instead of an overhead cost. Now, another case in point example in this category is risk tolerance software and the breakout growth of Riskalyze over the past 5 years. Historically, risk tolerance was something you had to do for every client once they came on board to affirm to the regulators that you met the Know Your Client or KYC requirements before you invest in the portfolio. So determining risk tolerance was a necessity, but it was an overhead cost. You already had the client and the revenue. You just had to be able to check the box. So some firms wrote their own questionnaires. A few used more rigorous third-party solutions like Finametrica. But Finametrica always had rather limited market share. And I think it was because risk tolerance assessments were an overhead expense, and most firms want to manage down their overhead costs. And in practice, that meant a lot of people saying, well, why would we pay for a third-party solution? We can just make a decent questionnaire ourselves. But Riskalyze is different. Because Riskalyze is something you don't just use with clients you're onboarding. Riskalyze is something you use with prospects to bring revenue in. I think that's what was so brilliant about Riskalyze from its value proposition perspective. Instead of just giving risk tolerance questionnaires to clients to understand their portfolios that you're designing, Riskalyze made it easy for prospects to take the risk tolerance assessment themselves. You can embed it in your website. You can embed it in your email signature. You can just send it out as a quick link to prospects. And then they can not only take their own risk tolerance assessment, but also easily input their own portfolios to see how their risk tolerance lines up with their own portfolio. And what inevitably happens? Prospects complete the risk tolerance assessment, enter their portfolio, see that their portfolio is overconcentrated and risky, because virtually every do-it-yourselfer is not well diversified. And then Riskalyze basically helps them scare the crap out of themselves about how out of whack their portfolio is, realize what they have at risk and that the advisor's portfolio is better designed, and call the advisor for help. That makes Riskalyze into a revenue driver with prospects, while Finametrica is simply used to meet KYC requirements for the client. End result? Riskalyze Pro costs nearly double what Finametrica does. Their new premier platform is almost triple the price of Finametrica. And in barely 5 years, they've grown more market share than Finametrica did in 20 years at double the price. This is why the positioning of advisor technology and where it's used in our process matters so much. We just flat out pay more for software that drives revenue for us compared to solutions that are just in the overhead category. And because we want to grow, the firms that are giving us revenue growth opportunities like Riskalyze and eMoney Advisor are now some of the fastest growing technology firms in our industry. But the other reason why all of this matters, and I wanted to talk about it today, is what it means for the future of advisor technology. Because advisor business models themselves are in the midst of a lot of change right now. As more and more advisors converge on the AUM model, it's getting very competitive to gather new assets, and it's driving advisory firms to focus more and more on financial planning beyond just investment management to differentiate themselves. In some cases, unhinging, at least partially, from the AUM model and charging additional financial planning fees, or even unhinging entirely from the AUM model and just charging financial planning retainer fees, especially now that we have a payment processing platform to handle recurring retainer financial planning fees. But think about it for a moment, how that plays out with advisor technology. In a world where financial planning is your primary value proposition, and that's what you get paid for, and you either don't manage assets at all, or you just implement simple index portfolios and focus your time and energy and value elsewhere because you're not really in the investment business, you're in the planning business, clients just need a portfolio. Does anyone really think we're going to keep paying 10 times the cost for portfolio accounting software versus financial planning software in that world? Nope. As investment management shifts to the background and it becomes the supporting service that financial planners offer, I think there's going to be immense pressure on portfolio accounting and reporting software solutions to bring their costs way down as they get shifted out of the revenue driving category and into the overhead expense to be managed category. And at the same time, new doors are going to open for financial planning software. Because if and when we're really primarily in the business of doing financial planning and earning financial planning fees as the primary revenue driver, well, frankly, our financial planning software needs to get a lot better to actually be able to support that. I think we're overdue for the next generation of financial planning software. But we'll also realistically pay a lot more. I mean, if most advisors got paid solely in financial planning fees, and it made us willing to pay $15,000 a year for planning software, the way that Orion charged a $15,000 minimum fee for portfolio accounting software, how awesome could that be as financial planning software? Really, so much of our planning software today is really just limited by the constraints of managing the company. I mean, if you only manage so much for your software, you can only hire so many engineers, you can only do so much to build it. But if financial planning software companies could charge 5 to 15 times as much and justify it because we as advisors can effectively grow our financial planning fees faster and charge more and add more revenue, that we would happily pay those higher fees, what does that software look like? And what happens to companies today like Tamarack and Black Diamond and Orion as that future unfolds and advisors are suddenly only willing to pay portfolio accounting software in the future at 1/5 or 1/15th the cost per client that they do today, the way we do for planning software today. And perhaps RIA custodians will just start throwing it in for free. Fidelity seems to be doing something along those lines with their increasingly robust WealthScape platform. Because we'll still need something, but it's easier maybe to just let the custodian do it at their size and scale and save us the overhead expenses ourselves. That does introduce some other conflicts of interest for us and our ability to change RIA custodians in the future, but that's a discussion for another day. Now, to be fair in all this, there are firms that solely or primarily manage portfolios, and they're going to continue to doing that as their value proposition for the foreseeable future. They have a legitimate investment process they're good at, and it adds value. And what that means is there will still be a need for independently provided, more complex and sophisticated portfolio accounting and reporting tools as well at that higher price point. But still, it means there's a door opening up for, we'll call it simpler, low-cost portfolio accounting solution for all those firms that still need something, but don't need the complexity and don't want to pay the price of a full-scale portfolio reporting solution. Maybe that'll be a growth opportunity for one of today's smaller portfolio reporting startups like Capitect and Quanti and Blue Leaf and Panoramics, or maybe it'll be a newcomer that comes to the table. But I do think there's going to be a major divide that emerges in advisor technology over the next few years. And the divide's going to be between the planning-centric firms on one side that increasingly want much better planning software and will pay a lot more because it drives their revenue, but who will de-emphasize and cut down on their willingness to pay for the portfolio reporting solutions, versus the firms that stay on the investment management side and will continue to control costs on their planning software, but pay 10x the price for portfolio reporting solutions instead because they need it to drive their revenue. Basically, there's a big fintech divide, a split that's coming between the firms that become more planning-centric and the firms that stay more investment-centric. Because planning-centric firms will treat planning software as a direct expense and portfolio reporting as overhead, just as most of today's investment-centric firms today treat portfolio reporting tools as a direct expense and planning software as an overhead cost to be managed. When it comes to the CRM software, unfortunately, I think those folks are just stuck in the overhead category for the foreseeable future for no matter what. But I hope this helps a little, just as some food for thought about the evolution of advisor technology, why it is that some software types cost so much more than others, and I think, frankly, why it is that we pay so much for some software versus others. And perhaps a little fun thought experiment to imagine. If you were going to pay $15,000 a year for financial planning software, what would that software do? What could it do? How awesome would it be, and what features would you want to need to create new value for clients and justify what could be a lot more in financial planning fees and a lot more value that you create for clients with that new tool? This is Office Hours with Michael Kitces. We're normally 1 p.m. East Coast time on Tuesdays, but unfortunately my calendar was tied up yesterday, so here we are this morning. Thanks for joining us, everyone, and have a great day.